Hello, everyone. Now, we know in sustainability, you have to cover a broad range of topics. There's so much to learn about, so much expertise, and it's tough to really get all the knowledge in all topics, and so you have to continuously improve. But what we're going to show now, and we're bringing on Maggie Lee, who is actually a four-time PHISTer. Those of you who are also four-time PHISTers will remember, in PHIST 1, Maggie did a brilliant discussion on best practices in food waste management on behalf of the WWF. Coming back in PHIST 2, she co-led a workshop on plastic and reducing plastic waste. Then when we went virtual PHIST 3, she put on a different hat and on behalf of Sea Circular, co-presented on the circular economy. And now for the fourth PHIST, Maggie will be presenting on sustainable seafood. So one, Maggie always comes with expert knowledge, jam-packed content, and benefits everybody who pays attention and listens to what she has to say. And it's really amazing to see her now 4 times at PHIST, 4 different topics, dropping the knowledge and expertise on a really important one, because now we have the pleasure of hearing Maggie break it down on really how to go about sustainable seafood, what the challenges, opportunities, and best practices are. So Maggie, please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me in this session. And my name is Maggie Lee. I represent the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, GDST, today. And I have a very interesting topic for you. So as my session's name suggests, it's biting into sustainable seafood, which means or translates into responsible seafood sourcing and seafood traceability for hotels. I'm sure you're wondering what we can do about the seafood dilemma nowadays, because as you may already know, that seafood pricing is just going up and up and up. And there's quite a lot of dilemma about how we're already consuming quite a lot of the fish stocks in the oceans, and that many of them are depleting as we speak. And so without further ado, I would like to jump right in to talk more about this subject, which is definitely very pertinent to hotels around Southeast Asia. So seafood, as we all know, is definitely a major part of protein and also culture in Southeast Asia. It makes up about, in Asia, we consume about more than 60% of the global fish catch. So definitely we're one of the key stakeholders of the global seafood market. And unfortunately, there are some not so comfortable figures that I must share with you today. About 29% of global fish stocks are overexploited, meaning that many of these populations are already declining, and that about 61% of global fish stocks are fully exploited, meaning that they're not going to be able to rebound. And about 4% of bluefin tuna. Many of us may imagine bluefin tuna would be one of the top delicacies, especially eaten raw with Japanese cuisine, is actually only 4% of that is actually left compared with unfished levels. So there is a very sharp decline of quite a lot of different species around the world that is the most fished types of seafood. And we know that about 49% of the drop in ocean diversity was observed since the 70s, when we first have records of what biodiversity meant. And more than half of the world's corals have disappeared. You may have heard of different reasons why corals have disappeared, some of which are pertinent to how seafood is being caught from our oceans. And very interestingly, especially pertinent to Thailand, is that there's a very quick deforestation rate of mangroves, and it's actually about 3 to 5 times that of forests. So they are disappearing at very alarming rates. We are situated in this region in Southeast Asia, which is actually adjacent to what it's called the Coral Triangle. And about 120 million people depend on thriving oceans for their livelihoods, just in this part of the world alone. And so this is definitely not just an environmental problem, but definitely a problem to do with our livelihoods and everyone's livelihoods as well. So going into detail about seafood is that there's something called IUU Seafood that I would like to talk about today. IUU Seafood, have you heard of that? It is actually illegal, unreported, and unregulated seafood. And that is something that quite a lot of intergovernmental organizations and governments around the world are trying to tackle. So as we already know that this type of seafood is actually very illegal, and it's damaging to legal seafood industries. We know that many different governments are trying to establish regulations for this. And so a new Japanese regulation is going to come into effect in 2022, December, that bans the import of IUU seafood, as you can see in this clipping right here. And so this is one of the bigger seafood markets of the world, Japan being a big country in terms of population. And also, they're very well noted for their liking of seafood and also their transactions on seafood. And next, of course, we know that the US also has a very big appetite on seafood. And unfortunately, IUU seafood also plagues the US markets as well. And we know that about 2.4 billion is the price tag that we put on IUU fishing. And that's quite a lot of seafood that is entering even our own supply chains here in Thailand or in Southeast Asia. And so what is actually really being done about IUU seafood, and why is IUU seafood important to us? Well, first of all, they're unregulated, meaning that nobody's actually making sure that they're not harming our ecosystems in the seascapes. And they do definitely impact the sustainability of aquatic resources and threatens the vulnerable ecosystems in our oceans. They cost the global economy quite a lot of money as well every single year, in terms of governments trying to patrol the situation, to patrol the seas and to control the situation, and also just encroaching into places where there would be illegal seafood activities otherwise. And of course, IUU fishing is also linked to another a big problem that's very close to my heart, as I also work in this area, is that plastic aquatic litter is also related to ghost gear, which is actually most rampant with IUU fishing, meaning that there are less scrupulous fishers that discard their gear in the oceans, and they end up still catching fish or seafood, but for no good reason at all. They're just actually obstructing our oceans and creating more litter that kills wildlife. And of course, at the end of the day, IUU fishing exploits cheap labor, and sometimes they definitely infringe human rights. And they are, at most times, these people are most times the poorest of the poor. And so on the other side of the spectrum, we have responsible seafood. By doing the right thing, by choosing responsible seafood, you can help reduce the negative consequences to the environment in the form of biodiversity loss, seascape degradation, and resource depletion, as well as to reduce loss of livelihoods displaced. Remember, in the Coral Triangle, how many people depend on that? Yes, you can help by actually making sure that there's actually stable income to those who are actually following the rules. And how do we know when we're doing the right thing? So there are quite a lot of challenges that come into mind, especially with seafood. We know that there's a very high demand of seafood as we're all reaching an age of being able to have more disposable income for the rich. And actually, it's a very polarizing effect, of course, but we have a very high demand of seafood. While that is the case, we know that there's very low understanding and capacity building for understanding how seafood is actually sourced, and how can we actually play a role in ensuring that the seafood we source are from responsible or sustainable sources. At the same time, supply is declining as well. We know that for example, in Japan, again, the largest of all bluefin tuna is actually going for auction every year in Japan. And that biggest tuna in Japan is actually going smaller and smaller by the year. And we know that that's also a result of how we now fish these tunas out of the ocean when they are smaller compared with their ancestors. And so there's quite a lot of challenges in this space. And we know that by actually just waving the flag of saying doing the right thing is actually not as useful as reminding ourselves what is actually defined as responsible seafood. In this slide right here, you see two pyramids. On the left side, you see actually a pyramid that at WWF and GDST, we think these are actually the hallmarks of responsible seafood. And so at the very top of the pyramid, you do have the Marine Stewardship Council and the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, MSC and ASC certified seafood. These seafood actually go through a very robust process of being certified with these two labels. One stands for wild caught and the other stands for grown seafood or farm seafood. And these are definitely at the pinnacle of that pyramid. And so by sourcing MSC and ASC, you definitely have certainty in terms of how there is a chain of custody of legal seafood and that is actually rid of IUU fishing. And then in the middle, you have responsible seafood. These may not be able to actually achieve MSC or ASC certification at that point, maybe due to financial reasons or maybe due to other reasons. For example, there may not be a certification for that specific species of seafood just yet. And so there's quite a lot of responsible seafood whereby these supply chains are actually trying to do the right thing. And so there could be many options in responsible seafood, such as the fishery improvement projects, aquaculture improvement projects as well, AIPs and FIPs. These are definitely on their way to actually achieving a certifiable level of excellence in being responsible. And then at the bottom of this green pyramid, you do have the green listed seafood. According to any of the WWF seafood guides, you can actually find a list of green listed seafood that would be much better to source, meaning that they're either more abundant in numbers or they are more ethically sourced from the oceans or from aquacultures. So there's a very wide spectrum of these as well. And then on the right-hand side, you see a red pyramid, which actually signifies what types of seafood to avoid. And so these are also important. And going back to the seafood guide is that there's a bunch of red listed seafood for each one of these WWF seafood guides by geography, meaning that these species may be a lot more depleted than the other species, or they may be facing challenges, especially with IUU fishing. And so to avoid these would be our best option. And then below those are the IUCN red listed species. These species are already classified as facing an imminent threat of extinction to a different extent, perhaps. But this red list should also be a guiding post in terms of what not to source. And also below that would be the CITES Appendix 1 species. These species are, like the IUCN red list, are also facing imminent threats, and that we should definitely avoid sourcing them at all costs. And also a rule of thumb is that sharks should be avoided in any way. We know that there are quite a lot of cultures, mine included, that actually favors shark fin or any types of shark related delicacy. But we know that sharks are actually some things that are depleting at maximum rate, and also are depleting so fast that we understand that there might be many different species that are facing very real threats of extinction in the next few years. And so these are definitely at the very, very tip of that pyramid as well. On the right-hand side, definitely avoid these at all costs. What is seafood traceability? So you may ask. Traceability is different from transparency. Traceability means that when there is an exercise that produces the need to be traceable, meaning that maybe there's a food recall, or maybe there is a question about food safety, can you trace back to where your suppliers got their supplies from? And so that is actually a custody of data of where your seafood is from, how it was caught, what types of seafood is it, what species it is, how it was actually shipped to where it is right now, and whose possession is it in right now. And so that's actually a chain of custody of this data, and we call that traceability, which is different from transparency, which may also involve the voluntary giving up of information to the public or to related parties. And so how do we actually have traceability in the first place, and why do we need traceability? Of course, traceability means higher quality products. We're all consumers ourselves, and we understand that if we find a product that is traceable, it means that there is actually a traceable a stream of responsibility. We can find out who's responsible for our food, and at times who's responsible for the lack of quality of our food. We also, this is also conducive to continuous improvement, meaning that with traceability, we know where we're actually not doing as well in, and we can actually go back and do better in them. And also making sure that we keep our company's reputation by presenting our sources, by actually knowing who to find when there's a problem, and understanding how we're actually compliant with all the regulations that are involved. And at the very end of the day, traceability has been proven in many ways that it's actually cost saving and results in much better profits because of the better quality of your supply chain and how your supply chain is more trusted. And so this translates into a lot more trust by your guests or by your customers in terms of where exactly your seafood is from, and how do I know if it's responsible or not, and whether or not illegality has already creeped into your supply chain. And so there was a global effort definitely coming in since 2017 with the WWF and the Institute of Food Technologists that form what we now call the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. So this initiative was created by these two organizations that I mentioned, and they formed this open dialogue, which is definitely reflected in its name, with different seafood industry members of the world. They did go around the world opening this dialogue to all the stakeholders around, and they were also in Thailand and in Southeast Asia prominently to speak with stakeholders, myself involved as I am one of their staff that's based in Thailand. And so this type of work is actually not extremely ingenious, because we know that this is a much needed initiative in the seafood industry. It's just that we do need to agree on how do we actually set a standard for seafood traceability so that we can trace back to ensure that our supply chains are rid of IUU fishing, are responsible in ways possible, and the data is there to prove it. So aside from with traceability, there are two main subjects or main topics involved. First of all, it's interoperability, meaning that we do have a lot of data. From day to day, you probably use your phone, your computer to track many different things. This type of data is largely available to you, but it's not available to the person next to you. How you transfer this data depends on how you send it. So usually you would send it through email, or maybe you would actually have a platform where this data is uploaded and shared with the people you want to share this with. Interoperability means that in a network of agreed individuals or organizations, we can actually share this data, which will not change in any form when it's opened by different parties, meaning that they can access this data and it's not adulterated by different sources. It cannot be tampered with, and that this data will actually reflect the integrity of your supply chain. And so GDST 1.0 is the first ever global industry-led standard to create this interoperable seafood traceability. It is a standard that is open for public use. Anyone can actually adopt this, and you can join the GDST for free and receive more information as a member on how to actually adopt seafood traceability into your supply chains. You don't have to already have a track record of using the standard to join the GDST. You can join the GDST first as your first step. And so what exactly does the GDST 1.0 standard dictate? So in the left here, you see this version that is launched in February 2020. It is the first ever version. And we do see that in the future, it will be upgraded into other versions like many other standards. So this standard dictates what are the minimum required key data elements, or what we call KDEs, that need to be documented and transmitted when sharing with these parties in our supply chain. Remember that diagram about how we're interoperable, and when each party opens the same data, it should actually look the same. So we're talking about what are the parameters that we're looking at that needs to be kept in data. It could involve the ship's name that caught the seafood. It could involve the geography, the exact location where this the seafood was caught. It could also include the species, and also include the registration name and number of the vessel or the organization that runs the operations of catching that seafood. So there's quite a lot of information, and the collective of parties that came together to form the standard agreed in this collective body that this will be the minimum list of requirements that you should keep track of. And now that this slide is actually in need of updating, because as of today, we do have a few more companies joining us, and the largest tuna operator in the world has just joined the GDST as well as of 3 days ago. So we're very excited, because this is definitely a time for a lot of growth. And you may recognize a lot of these logos because they are quite well known in different industries. There are quite a lot of companies that have already joined the GDST. They're running 69 companies. And that many of these other organizations such as MSC and ASC and other very notable NGOs, NPOs working in the seafood industry have also endorsed the GDST standard. And on the right-hand side, you see a list of icons of all the solution providers. These could be your IT solution providers who can help you match what you need to have as a computer system for the maintenance of having the GDST standard. So it's actually quite a seamless approach because we've already worked directly with the solution providers, meaning that you don't have to install a separate system to keep track of what the GDST 1.0 dictates. It could be your current ERP systems that are keeping stock for your hotels and for your sourcing for the businesses you source for. And so there is a very easy conversion there, and we're trying to make it even more easy. So to give you an example is that the iberostar group, which is definitely a big name in hospitality with 120 hotels worldwide, headquartered in Spain and operating for over half a century, they are also a GDST member. And they have been providing us with quite a lot of testimonies in terms of why hotels should source sustainable seafood and why should they actually adopt seafood traceability to prove it. So they said that in the tourism industry, many of the medium and larger enterprises face challenges to standardize data collection across the multiple companies, franchises, and supplier partners within their network. And that their company, iberostar, has shown that they are playing their part by giving their guests the option to eat certified and traceable seafood. And that is actually very important because nowadays we understand that consumers are more and more concerned about the environment, and that they do feel that they have a right to know where their food is coming from. And with this GDST program, we're trying to offer free assistance for companies like yours to actually join this very good cause of adopting seafood traceability. And we're definitely here to help you with every step of the way. And so please contact me for more information if your hotel wishes to join. But definitely, it always takes the first step into doing the right thing and also to source responsible and sustainable seafood for you to start getting away from IUU fishing and illegal seafood. And so I thank you for listening today to me, and also thank you for doing the right thing for our oceans.
Thank you, Maggie. Once again, wealth of knowledge, wealth of learning that people take away from PHIST. And so really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing what you're able to deliver for PHIST 5 for an entirely new topic to bring knowledge and expertise to PHIST. Really appreciate it. And hopefully in Phuket, we'll see you next year. Thank you.